Greetings, friends, and welcome to this interview episode of A Church Dismantled, A Kingdom Restored. I'm delighted and honored to have my brother Greg Kanagy, who is the director of the Gator Camp Wilderness School, or maybe I didn't get that quite right, but Greg will straighten me out. Greg has been working in wilderness camping for a long time and has a great vision for what God wants to do in the life of the boys that he works with. And so, Greg, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's good to join my brother this morning. Doesn't happen very often.
Too little. Greg, why don't you just talk to us about wilderness camping, what its origins were? You've done a lot of research and talked to folks who started all of this, and I think a lot of our audience might not know what wilderness camping is.
Well, one area you failed to mention to your listeners is that this is not the smooth part of the Kanagys this morning. You're the smooth part, so
I don't think
they may be disappointed.
No, never disappointed by you. So now that that's out of the way, what's wilderness camping?
Smooth and articulate as Conrad. I live in the woods.
What's wilderness camping, my brother? Therapeutic camping, huh?
Well, you just asked if I'd share some origins of therapeutic wilderness camping, and actually last year marked the 75th anniversary of the first wilderness camp in East Texas. And it was founded by a gentleman by the name of Campbell Lockmiller. But some interesting roots that tie into even to some of our great memories growing up. In the late 20s, early 30s in New York City, they recognized significant deficits in children that were living in the city in terms of their physical health and how that was affecting other health areas, mental health, etc., emotional health. And so they got together with a couple leaders in working with children in the outdoors. One was named L.B. Sharp, and he was a professor, very well known, has written a lot of books, and several still being published at this time. And Campbell Lockmiller got together with L.B. Sharp and went from Texas up to New Jersey in the summers. And they would bring these children out of the cities to these camps in the woods. And they would spend several weeks there, but they would do a pre and post physical on these children out of New York City. And what they found was there was dramatic changes in not only physical health, but also mental and emotional health from just a short stay outside the environment they lived in. And actually that was what came out of there, was the founding of what we know as a Fresh Air Fund as kids, when we had, Bob Sears and all those other kids that came through our home. So during that time, those summers, LB and Campbell and some of those leaders would get together and talk about ways that they could improve and build upon the model. And one was a structure that's meaningful to kids. Another one was the planning process, which is taking ownership in what they're doing on a daily basis, both short and long term, taking care of conflicts with the people that you live with, and then learning from it by what they called evaluation, would be the term that we would use today. And as I mentioned, 75 years ago, last year, through the Dallas Salesmanship Club in East Texas, Campbell Lockmiller started the first camp, and it was called Camp Woodland Springs. They moved location a number of years later, and it became the Dallas Salesmanship Club camp. And it was supported financially by the Dallas Salesmanship, which was 400 very successful businessmen in the Dallas area who were well connected, not only in Texas, but across the nation. And so when you look archive pictures from that camp in Texas, you see visitors there like Gerald Ford, Henry Kissinger, Richard Nixon, Lyndon B. Johnson, all would have at different times visited the camp. And so there was some guys, some men that would have come on as chiefs. And in 1965, Campbell retired, and Jack and Ruth Eckert, in Florida, the Eckert name is well known. There's Eckert College in Florida. There's Ruth Eckert Hall, which is a concert hall. One you may be familiar with would be Eckert Drugs. That would be Jack and Ruth Eckert. That would have been their company. And they, the camp in Texas was nationally known, and they saw what were there, experienced it a bit, saw what was going on. And so they called several of the staff members from the salesmanship club and said, would you come to Florida and start wilderness camping, therapeutic wilderness camping in Florida? And so several of those gentlemen said yes, and came to Florida, and they bought a piece of ground, a couple 100 acres, and they had several pup tents and a little bit of, and their food, and they went out and started camping with a couple boys. And that grew over several years into 17 different camps, 6 in Florida, 5 in North Carolina, and up the eastern seaboard as far north as Vermont and the Lake Champlain River Valley. They had one, and I can't imagine the kind of winters they would have had there, but they were very successful. And as they experienced success, more and more large corporations became involved. And with the large corporation involvement, there was a gradual squeezing out of the element of Christianity and faith in the Eckert youth programs. And in fact, one day, the head of the foundation for the Eckerts came in and told Mac McKenzie, the executive director, he pointed to his Bible in the office and said, that needs to leave. And so these leaders were very committed believers, and it wasn't long before they did leave the Eckert youth programs. And one moved to North Carolina, one moved to South Carolina, several stayed in Florida. And that was really kind of the beginning of the end of the Eckert youth programs. And sadly today, there is only one camp that remains open in existence. It's a girls' camp up here in Brooksville, Florida. Been there. And again, they had never even seen the books that Campbell Lockmiller had written about therapeutic wilderness camping. And Ruth Eckert, part of her passing, she said that this camp needs to remain open, and so it has. But I tell you that to where it ties in to Gator Wilderness Camp and some of the other faith-based therapeutic wilderness camps is, as you know, in 1990, after I graduated from college, I went down and was a chief at the Fair Play Boys Camp in South Carolina. And at that time, that was being directed by Ken Edgar, who had come to the camp in East Texas, was there a number of years, and then had moved to Eckert. And then again, with some of the change that went on in Eckert, moved to South Carolina. And so there's also Mac McKenzie, was again another long time. These guys spent 50 plus years in therapeutic wilderness camping, gave their lives for it. And through Mac, the North Carolina Baptist started a boys camp and have a girls camp. In South Carolina, there's a boys and girls camp, and then one in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Maryland. And they're working in Canada right now they're running a summer camp, or they're getting that to be year round. And so that association is called Wilderness Road Therapeutic Camping Association. Interesting history. We get together several times a year for training. Next week, we have a supervisor training going on. And then several years ago, developed an annual journal that comes out. So many of these these leaders over the years spent their time in the woods with groups and with boys and teaching the counselors and leading their camps, that they didn't spend a lot of time writing. And so there is some of that available. I've made 2 different trips out to East Texas to stay and meet with Grover Lockmiller. He's a retired child psychiatrist and son of Grover, of Campbell. And he was also a chief back in his college years. So he has a good grasp, not only from being a chief, but from his profession. And he was able to get me a lot of unpublished documents that his dad had written, as well as some others. And so we started producing an annual journal. This is a cover of the first one. We call it the Hoya Hoya. Hoya is a camp term that we use around camp for pay attention, or at the end of the day. Chief always says Hoya in a group, so it's kind of a uniquely camp term. But this is, again, filled with just quality camp information that now we have former chiefs and staff in the different camps. They're in grad school. They're saying, where can I go for a resource? This provides that. So we produce one annually. This is Campbell Lockmiller in the flannel shirt, and Mac McKenzie is longtime program director. But it's just one that we've put out there and been pleasantly surprised. I haven't looked recently, but I know that when I looked maybe a year ago, that we had sold over 800 copies of each.
Where are they available?
On Amazon.
Okay.
You can go on Amazon and find them.
Okay.
So that's just some ways that it's more than promoting, it's getting a hold of our roots to hold on to that philosophy, the truth of what they taught, that continues to work very well with boys today. I'm sitting here, brother, in my chair. I'm sitting here gingerly because I was at Walmart a few minutes ago, and I was walking across the parking lot, and I was attacked by a former camper in a hug, and he knocked my back out.
Oh my goodness.
And he was at Walmart with his dad, and old Sears saw me and just was across the parking lot. And, here was a boy who, prior to coming to camp several years ago, his behavior was so out of control that his family got him one of those sheds that they make living quarters on, an AC, and actually were requiring him as a 10 and 11-year-old to sleep at night in the shed in the backyard.
Wow.
And prior to Sears coming to camp, we said he cannot come to camp unless he can stay inside with the family. And so we got past that hurdle, and he made some huge life changes. Here's a boy that's been abused in all kinds of ways in the past. And through the camp process, working through that and the healing. And the problem is, when he was at camp, he was small, so those big hugs didn't hurt, but he's grown 4 inches in the last 6 months. So he's turned into a big boy. But those are just the kind of wins that I wouldn't trade through all the hard work and effort. This week, it marks 12 years since we moved to Florida. And we moved down, we got here like 17th, 18th of June, and the board said, we need you to work, but we don't have any money to pay you. And when I look back, I was added up. The income at that point that was coming into camp, and it was closed, was actually $9,600 a year.
Oh my goodness.
Annually. And so, I think we just don't ask God, how big are you and how you can supply our needs, because I think last year there was something like 1.3 came in to help run the camp.
Greg, that's amazing.
And so when you read the scripture where he said, but when he says, I'll multiply it 50, hundreds of times over, he really will do that. And so we're thankful for how he's done that. So we worked to, and this is 12 years ago, I went to meet with, there wasn't a license for the camp. Camp had kind of been open and closed and was viewed it as a failure. And I went to meet with their head of licensing in the state. And he told me if I knew what was good for me, I would just pack my family up and we'd move north and never meet again. And he was just speaking honestly to me. He turned into a good friend. He's retired now, but he's still a good friend. We still keep in contact. He was just speaking truth. And I would go to meet with people about maybe getting involved and lots of no's, but there were some yeses. And in September of 2009, we opened with one boy, and he's 24 now, works hard in Sarasota, lives with his mom and his sister, and is the main breadwinner for his mom and his sister. That was our first camper. But over the years, there's been over 200 boys through camp. And we just look at it as really, it's just one life at a time having an opportunity to change. And several distinctives about us within therapeutic wilderness camping. One, every boy has to make the decision to come to camp. So the family has to say, yes, we'll be involved. But the boy has to say, yes, I want to change and I know I need help. So if we aren't in that platform, process is over, boy doesn't come to camp. It's interesting. Almost every boy that's come to camp, I can think of one, has said he wanted to come to camp. There's been a handful that have said they don't want to change their bad attitude, but they want to come to camp. And so that's a no-go. And then there's been a couple dozen who say that they'd like to come to camp, but they don't believe the process, that they have a choice in it. And so we conclude the meeting and give them a window of an opportunity, typically about a week, where if they'd like to reschedule a meeting to come out and see camp, they have to call their family social worker and reschedule it. Not mom or dad or a grandparent, whoever they're living with. They need to make that call. And what we found over the years, it's extremely beneficial as, again, part of that choice process of being part. Because if we're going to make changes in our lives, there's not a quick fix. It's not slick and easy. There's not a 3-step approach. It's just hard work and effort and sticking to it on days that you feel like doing something else. And so that's part of that pre-admission process. And we have 2 full-time family workers that are involved with the families. Are there things in that family system that need to make some changes? Where in that family system needs encouragement? They all need encouragement. We're serving at this point quite a few boys that are being raised by grandparents, but more great-grandparents and great aunts and uncles. And I think that's attributed to the family system that is deteriorated so significantly in our country that even the grandparents aren't around anymore. And so, for us, if you think about in your setting, with having a grandson, actually our parents doing the parenting and what somebody in their mid to late 70s, the oldest grandparent we had was 83 years old, raising their grandson. And in fact, he's still raising his grandson. He's in high school now and doing well, but grandpa's probably 90 years old and raising his grandson. And so choice is a big part of our starting point. And then we've chosen to live in a pretty unique setting. We have 250 acres, and the boys actually build what they live in. And they use all hand tools, and they have to plan what they're going to build and then go cut it down and build that tent. But our boys haven't experienced a lot of wins in their lives. We don't get the boys that are academic achievers. We don't get the boys that have done well athletically. Boys don't come to camp that have succeeded academically. And if you look at what our culture calls success for a boy, if you can do one of those 3 as a boy, you're going to be accepted. And so for whatever reason, our boys haven't succeeded in those areas. And at camp, our starting points, you're accepted. You're part of us. You're one of us. And because of that, we're going to stick with you on hard days. And so to tie in what I just mentioned about their tent building, them building their campsite really represents the largest, most significant wins, victories, confidence builders in their lives. And part of our long-term planning, groups can plan canoe trips, backpacking trips. Back in April, the Cowboy group, our youngest group, our 11 and 12-year-olds, they went on a 24-day, 100-mile canoe backpacking trip on the Florida Trail and a 125-mile canoe trip. They planned that. They made all the menus, the budget, how they got from the 4.5 hours from camp to North Florida, reading the map. Those are all their responsibilities. And sometimes they stumble a little bit, but we all learn best from cause and effect. And so learning, education develops an element that's real to them that they've never experienced. And they, what I would say, quote, live with their answers. And, you know, I went up to check in with that group one night when they were hiking on the Florida Trail. And, you know, all of those boys were walking with a different step than what they had back at camp, from the confidence they were gaining by hiking that 100 miles, never believing it was possible, but sticking to it, and the feeling of accomplishment. And so those are all just kind of areas and kind of the starting points for our boys. And then program elements would be first relationship. And so our chiefs, that's what we call our counselors in the group. And we, they make a minimum of an 18-month commitment, and they're in that group, immersed in that group 5 days a week, 24 hours a day. We have a staff house for them and their 2 days off where they can rest and recoup, but they're immersed in that group. And if a counselor is going to be successful, he can tell you the time in his chiefing with the group when he decided his experience wasn't about him. And when a chief decides his experience is not about him, it's not about his personal convenience, his personal comfort, and he's all in, something changes in that group that is just dramatic. And so to kind of disciple a chief and lead him through and encourage him that, you know, it's okay to kind of jump off that cliff of losing your own personal comfort and own personal convenience. And it's going to be okay. And you're going to be a different person than you've ever been in your life as a result. And I've seen that happen in chiefs' lives over and over again. And so they're down living with the boys. And we have up to 10 boys in a group. Right now, our family workers are telling families that call for referrals that it's going to be at least a 14-month wait because we are swamped with referrals. We have 3 groups, 3 different age groups. They live in peer groups. But the relationship part that we start with, what we call kind of cornerstones for living at camp, that you're accepted, that you were created by God and you weren't a mistake. And we're going to walk with you. And one element of many that is very unique to camp, I've never heard it explained this way in any other child care setting, is that we tell a chief that if he's ever going to get to the soul of that boy, where he starts talking about past hurts, trauma, loss, abuse, he has to know that he can trust chief. And it's the same for all of us. We don't go spill our guts with someone we don't know. Okay, we want to know that we trust them. We kind of feel them out. Are they trustworthy? You know, what kind of person they are. How does a troubled boy learn to trust a chief? By misbehaving. And as he misbehaves and not listens, chief's response is the key. And if we don't respond to our boys with grace, mercy, and love, we'll never get to the soul of that boy. The part that's so key is, what do we read in Scripture? It's Christ what? Grace, mercy, and love on the cross that allows us even to be sitting here this morning, because we're completely unworthy. Completely unworthy. And so it's that same message to our boys that we just not put are verbals on it that we live that conveys that message. Okay, so that's relationship. And then we have a basic structure piece. We don't do military structure, but there's something about getting out of your bed in the morning, getting dressed and making your bed. Several years ago, his name fails me right now, but a 4-star general had commencement address at University of Texas. And he wrote a little book on it then. I think it's, probably takes 20 minutes to read. But the title of his commencement address was something effective, make your bed. And he talked to those graduates just about get up in the morning, get dressed and make your bed. What's that do for you? So I use that as a small example of structure, but there has to be structure in our lives. And so we have that throughout the day. Wake ups at 6:30, bedtime is at often around 9:30 when a group decides, but they also have to have all their problems solved for the day because we know that tomorrow is going to be more challenges. And so we want to take care of today. So we have basic structure. And then there's a planning element, both short and long term. So Tuesday of each week, Tuesday afternoon, a group sits down and they have to look at their next 7 days. What would they like to do? What do they need to do? And sometimes what they would like to do and what they need to do, they get backwards and they have to learn from it. But they actually develop a plan for morning, afternoon, and evening, write it out with goal setting, a full page for each day. And then each morning after they come out from their tents, they have group devotions, and then they read that plan for the day. So we all know what's going on. So that planning process, the plan of my life, what I'm laying out that needs done on a daily basis, the short term is important. And then as I mentioned, groups can plan trips, and we call that long-term planning. And so right now, the cowboy group, they're really into horses, and there's a Florida Cracker Trail, they call it, that goes from the west coast of Florida on the Gulf to the east coast the third week of February. About 150, 175 horse riders and some wagons. And so we're doing the preliminary work, the group is, and we're helping out to find out, is that a trip that we could do if they take a week? They camp out on ranches, and there's some large ranches in Florida, 30 to 60,000 acres, and the trail goes through some of those ranches, and they camp out on that. And so some boys, we take the horses in a wagon, and some horses the boys would ride as well. But is that a possibility? And so for us, we say the sky's the limit. Let's get started working on it. And so as they do that, boys not only take ownership, but the motivation and belief that their failures academically, that light comes on that they really can do it. And it can change, and success is possible. And one of the things that we started on almost a weekly basis when COVID hit, we go to a family that has 5 different grocery stores in the Sarasota area. And we cook there every Saturday. So we were at the Detweiler's Palmetto store on Saturday. We cooked 150 racks of ribs, 300 pounds of brisket, 40 pounds of chicken, and 30 pounds of bacon. We were sold out by 3 p.m.
Wow.
But there was 5 graduated campers there on Saturday. 4 of them came to work. And so we bring graduated campers on and pay them very well for the day, and they love to work. And one of the boys that was there, a graduate of camp several years ago, he was expelled from middle school when he came to camp, was a mess, will be a junior in high school at Sarasota Military Academy. And on Monday, he was driving his vehicle to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and had 3 days of leadership training, including starting to teach jumping out of a plane in a parachute. And then he drove up by himself and was driving back later this week by himself and going to leadership training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And, again, there's a, just a young guy that had no chance prior to coming to camp, just a mess. And so it's exciting to have those kind of wins through it. And that's that short and long-term planning. Okay. What am I doing today? What am I doing this week? What am I doing long term? Life is farther than the end of my nose. Okay. And decisions, when we live that way, we teach our boys, we don't make very good decisions living that way. And so you have program pieces would be structure, relationship, planning, and then problem solving. Problem solving, we say, is the hardest part of camp. That's when you're living in a group and there's conflict comes up. We stop whatever we're doing and we'll work at it until it's solved. And sometimes we solve one problem and we go immediately into another problem. That's kind of our entire day, but that's life. But and in a group setting, when you live with people 24 hours a day, there's people there that you really get along with, people there that you'd say I'd rather not be around. And yet there's something very healthy about us all living together. I can't tell you how many times when we've gone on canoe trips, we've put two boys in a canoeing together for 3 weeks who've said they'll never learn to get along. Every one of them has learned to be good friends after that 3 weeks in a canoe. And so that resolution that we're going to solve problems as they come up. And then the last one is what we call evaluation. And after everything we do, we get together and we circle up and we said, did it work well or didn't it work well? We don't want to just do things over and over again for redundancy that are completely unsuccessful or failures. And so the last thing a group does before they go to bed, there's a little trail. They go back outside a campsite, some cabbage palm logs set up there in a U shape. And in the middle, there's been a fire laid up, kindling and shavings. It's already been done today. It was done as part of morning chores this morning. And the group goes back there, sits around the fire. They do a little singing. We say it's hard to sing good songs and have a bad attitude. And so we do a lot of singing at camp and enjoy it. A lot of boys, most boys learn to play guitar or some kind of ukulele, some kind of instrument while they're at camp as well. Just pick it up and do it because they want to try it. But they go back to powwow, and the question they all ask at powwow of the group is, if we live today, what would we change? What would we keep the same? We want to help our boys be in position where to have the courage to, again, change things that they know they need to change in order to be successful. And so it's fires go on, they're sitting around together as a group. It's a great reflective time for looking back on our day, what we do well. Also, as part of that, our counselors need to be in position to affirm our boys in very specific ways that they've done well. And some of our boys with their struggles, especially early on, are difficult to affirm. But I tell our chiefs, you got to catch them doing what's right. And after powwow's over, that evaluation period, they go back to bed. Chief tucks them in and has a prayer with every one of the boys, and that's the end of the day. And so it's in the woods. It's just an environment that's conducive by taking a lot of distractions out that our boys have always had. And we don't hear our boys talk about social media, missing video games, because they're out there in a boy's world, and just part of what goes on. And so it just provides so many different opportunities to make changes in just an environment that's just rich in what it has to offer. Is it demanding? It's very demanding. Does it require you to give your heart? It does require to give your heart, but the worthwhile part is it's just unreal to see what happens with some of the boys.
Greg, I'm always amazed by being present on campus there and seeing what you do and what your vision has been, and how you've taken camp from where it was when you were first sleeping in a camper to what it is now. And there's no way to kind of illustrate that here, but I have a couple of questions. One is, you're a student of camping, therapeutic camping. You're a student in some ways of the psychology of boys and how they develop, but you're also a student of the Florida history, and you contextualize the camping within the culture and history of Florida. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, you do conservation work by planting native species on the camp. You get the boys involved in the history of what happened around there. Why is that important to you, to contextualize what they're experiencing in the context of that area?
Well, one of the things, this was 2 weeks ago. Each year annually we have either the boys each do a science project or a living history project. Mm-hmm. And the idea for this actually came back years ago when Katie was in elementary school and had a science project. And of course, as parents, we've all labored and slaved over trifold boards and projects with our kids. And we went in to see Katie's presentation, and there was a trifold set up beside hers. And the only thing that was on it was completely blank. The only thing that was on it was the name of the student. And, that wasn't that student failure at fourth grade. Mm-hmm. And we're talking fourth grade here. Mm-hmm. That's a parent failure. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know what? I never want any of our boys to be in that position. And so this year was living history. So every boy chose a character from Florida history. And they do the research, the trifold, the report. We have a inventory of clothes. It looks like we do drama at camp, and we really don't. It's for our living history. But I'm going to give you, I think you'll appreciate this, Conrad. One of the boys did James Weldon Johnson. Have you ever heard of James Weldon Johnson?
Yeah, The Creation. I memorized when I was in school.
Right. So he also did one called The Prodigal. And one of the boys, who is African-American, James Weldon Johnson was African-American, did James Weldon Johnson, The Prodigal. And this is a kid who never could do a presentation in school. And it's a several minute poem. It probably took him 7-8 minutes to get through it. Okay. And it starts out, young man, your arm's too short to box with God.
Wow.
Is how that thing starts. Okay. You need to go read this poem. Yeah, it's incredible. And so Aiden was James Weldon Johnson. Wow. And he talked about James Weldon Johnson's fight for racial equality. He was a preacher. He was all kinds of different things. And he wrote this poem, and he read this poem as part of living history. And the historical part is, even let's just take our tools. One of the boys did a individual in Florida history who had a lot to do with developing the turpentine industry. So it was expensive, a number of hundreds of dollars to get some old antique turpentine tools in. But they get to see a reference point of what was in place. And part that tied it in for this boy is a county park they hiked through on their Florida trail trip was named after this gentleman who developed the turpentine industry in Florida. So it, again, all comes back around. And so we do the same thing. We try to plant 1,000 pine trees annually on the property. We try to do 500 to 800 bald cypress or pond cypress trees. We plant a number of different natives on the property. In fact, we have some trails named, and actually I was borrowing this from Ben Franklin, which again goes back a few years. But there were so many people in Philadelphia that didn't know how to read. So Ben Franklin came up and said, let's have Oak Street, let's have Maple Street, okay? Let's have Pine Street. And they planted oak trees on Oak Street. And so it was a reference point for them back then. And so we've taken some of our trails, like Cocoa Plum is a native of Florida. So we have a Cocoa Plum trail. So anywhere on Cocoa Plum Trail, you can always see a Cocoa Plum. And so you just look for different ways. And I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
No, you are.
To tie boys back into the roots. And there's a sense of belonging that comes with that. And there's a sense of place that our boys don't have. They've lived with multiple parents. They've lived with multiple step parents. You know, we've had boys that have been through 40 plus foster homes, 60 plus foster homes. And so what we really try to work at camp is being a sense of place. This is a boy's place. This is where they belong, and they're accepted here.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Just that you ground these boys in a place and give them a space to belong in. You know, Johnson's mother was the first school teacher, African-American school teacher in the state of Florida, and she nurtured him in the way that he went in terms of loving literature and the arts and music. And so many of these boys don't have that, but you're providing that for them. You're helping to provide that grounding and that nurturing for them. How long are they on campus or on the camp with you, the boys?
Average length of stay is about 18 months. I mentioned that there's a very intensive family systems piece. Mm-hmm. So every 5 weeks, the boys go home for a long weekend. They leave on a Thursday or Friday. They return the following Tuesday. They have goals for the weekend. The parents have goals for the weekend. And then a week at Thanksgiving, 2 weeks at Christmas. And so they're regularly scheduled. Doesn't matter what type of session you have, you're going home to practice living at home. And one of the things is as you know, 60 and 90 days is kind of how in our country view long-term care. But, you know, those problems in our boys didn't start in 30, 60, or 90 days. Many of them are rooted in that family system before they were ever born. Sure. And so it takes a long time, and a boy has to make that decision to change. So oftentimes you have a boy come to camp and he's just kind of so relieved to be here that he might float right along for several months until we say, look, you need to start, you know, why'd you come to camp? What do you need to work on? And so that tends to be about the average length of stay. We tell a boy, take all the time you need, but don't waste a day. And so we have one camper a number of years ago came through and got right on his goals and finished camp in 9 months. And over the winter, he stopped by one day, was working in the area. He runs a crew, and they do horizontal drilling. So if you know, like under roads and those kind of things. And so he pulled in here one night and he said, "Hey, Chief, I want to get down to my campsite." And so we went down, and he had a whole crew sitting in the back of his truck. And I was like, "What about those guys?" He's like, "They work for me. They're my guys. They're going to wait while I go see my campsite." So, you know, he was really super motivated and got right on it and finished camp much earlier. So it's really, you know, and then there's some boys that stay a little longer. It just really depends on where he's at and where the family's at.
Greg, how can people learn more about the camp? How can they get involved? Because this can't happen, obviously, without people being involved. How do people get involved in supporting the camp and getting to know more about the camp?
Well, before that said, I think about a number of years ago, several years ago, Disabilities of Florida came on the property for a tour and took them around. One of their attorneys and an investigator, they didn't know what was going on. And at the end of the tour, they were full of questions. At the end of the tour, they asked, what would it take to start a camp in every county in Florida? And I said, what do you think? And they said, probably not possible, sadly. And I said, you're correct, because it's about two things, okay? It's about your staff. We aren't a franchise. We aren't a McDonald's. You can't just roll this thing out perpetually. It's about the heart of our staff. So one is we need good staff. Okay, we need staff that are committed. Right now, I need a front desk person, office manager, big part of camp. Right now, the Ribs Project, since the 1st of May, we have cooked and sold over 8,500 racks of ribs on Saturdays at the Detweiler stores. We have cooked and sold over 800 briskets. And so looking for volunteers that can come down and say, hey, I can give a Saturday or two. Several years ago, we built a house just off the property. It's set up to sleep 24 people. That's what it's set up and designed to do. Because volunteers are a big part of what's going on. And so we need volunteers in a wide array. Right now, I need a group of ladies to come down and help with our nursery. I talked about that tree planting. A 3-gallon pine trees, $2.75. I can get a pine seedling for a nickel. However, the chances of a pine seedling failing are about 90%. So something that we need done is people to transplant those seedlings into a 1-gallon pot, and another year it goes into a 3-gallon pot. The following year it goes into the ground, and then now we're at a 90% success rate. Okay. We do some events up north, people that say, hey, we can help out with that. So it's staff, volunteers, and what I would call a cloud of witnesses. Scripture, we aren't, there's a lot of debate in Scripture. What is a cloud of witnesses? I know part of the cloud of witnesses are people that show up here and people abroad that pray for us. And provision and safety and care, protection of what's going on at camp. Another part of camp is in Florida, if you're going to have take Department of Children and Families boys, which we do, you don't have to take the funding, and you can't take it if there's a faith piece. Well, a faith piece is a big part of what we're doing. And so, again, that's part of the answer over the years is individuals and groups saying, hey, we can be part of this in a wide variety. And I just think if people take their gifts of their abilities and use them, when we use our gifts, it doesn't seem like work. When we do things that we aren't very good at, then it seems like work, doesn't it? It's a grind, it's an effort, but when we use our gifts, it just kind of flows. And so, people to be involved using their gifts. I'd like to, in the next year or so, I'd like to get a school open for graduates, a day school. It wouldn't be a residential at all in the Sarasota area, where they can get their high school diploma and get very involved in a trade while they're in high school. So that's one kind of for down the road. So there's just a wide variety, and we've had so many people get involved over the years. It's just a blessing, but there's continual challenges. I was cooking ribs on Saturday, and a lady came up and said, is this Gator Wilderness? And I said, it sure is. And she said, well, I'm the stepdaughter of Richard Weaver. Well, I'll tie Richard Weaver in. He was from Lebanon. He started the Star Silo Company. And so if you drive around Lancaster County and all over Pennsylvania, you'll see these concrete silos with a big blue star on. That's a Star Silo Company. That was Richard Weaver. In his later years, he lived in Florida, became very involved in supporting camp. You know what? A year and a half ago, he passed on. And all of a sudden, I didn't hear from him anymore. And here came a stepdaughter on Saturday to stop by our stand and tell me that passed on, and we'd never met. And so, as the saints are called into glory, we just need more people filling the ranks.
Greg, we've got to move towards wrapping up, but I think you're very modest about this, but I think it's interesting how, as I'm listening to you again, it feels like this is an intersection, perfect intersection of your calling with the needs of the world, of the boys that you work with, because in so many ways you model for them just this energy and curiosity about the world that you really want to pass on to them. So, I often say that who leads matters, and you lead in a way that models for the boys what you want them to become. And so I just always energized by what I hear from you, and just think you do amazing work. So anything else you'd like to say to our audience? It's been a real blessing having you here. Do you have a website where they can find out more?
Thanks for the opportunity, and come down and see us. Oh, you can go to our website, Gator Wilderness.
Okay, awesome.
Gator Wilderness, boyscamp.com. Yeah, look us up.
Great, Greg. Thanks for being with us. And audience, it really is amazing to see if you're down in the Arcadia, Florida area. Stop by and see Greg. He does tours on. Tell us about your tour for a second.
oh, well, you call up camp and say you'd like to see camp. And I say, come out. We don't really do strangers. And so we'll get a look around and, we're lots of people through camp and we're thankful for that.
Yeah. Thanks. And audience, you can find this on the podcast, The Church Dismantled, A Kingdom Restored. And this interview is, again, just a great example of the restoration work that God does in people's lives. And you can also find this on my YouTube channel, Conrad Kanagy. It'll be posted on Monday, June 21. So thank you, Greg, so much for being with us. God's blessing. It's been a blessing having you here.
Thank you, brother. Great to see you.
You too. See ya.